Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to give it another minute or so to make sure the folks that have registered get a chance to get logged in. For those of you who are interested, I'm located in central Pennsylvania in my office in my basement at my home. So far, the cricket I have in my basement is behaving himself. So if by chance you hear a cricket in the background, you're not hearing things. Give it another second or two. Okay, folks, we're going to get started. Welcome back to another Provident webinar. I'm your host, Ed Mann, Director of Training and Education for Provident. Today, we have a panel of fire chiefs from across the United States to talk about volunteer career combination fire departments. During the last several years of my tenure as the state fire commissioner in PA, I saw an increase in the number of fire departments who were going from an all volunteer force to having career personnel in a variety of methods. From watching professional publications and news stories, it seems as though combination fire departments are becoming more common across the country for a variety of reasons. In most cases, it seems as though the lack of volunteers at any given time of the day or the week is the impetus. In a few moments, I'll have each of the chiefs introduce themselves to give our listeners some background on themselves and their departments. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions, and we're asking you to use the question and answer feature to send your questions. We will make every effort to answer all of them. However, if we don't get to your specific question, we'll get answers to you via email in the days that follow. So a couple of quick slides from our sponsor, Provident. Provident's been in existence since 1902. It started as an independent insurance agency in the Pittsburgh area. In 1928, they started to provide service to volunteer, customized services to volunteer fire departments with accident and health insurance. Today, we provide combination and career fire departments and emergency medical services with a multitude of programs. We also have some special risk and transportation programs that we offer. Provident's been named one of the top insurance workplaces by the Insurance Business America magazine for the last 4 years. We just received word here a few weeks ago that we received the award again for 2021. We have our accident and health program. If you have an accident and health policy with us, you and your members and their immediate family have access to our first responder assistance program. We'll also offer a 24-hour accidental death and dismemberment insurance, group term life, critical illness policy, and of course, our Fire Plus property and casualty insurance. So today's webinar, combination departments, are they in your future? So now I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. So today we have Chief Donna Black, Chief Fred Windisch, Chief Rich Cowger, Captain Lowell, Ester, and Administrator Arthur Howe with us. And they're going to introduce themselves. Chief Black, if you want to go first, please.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for letting me be part of this panel today. Again, my name is Donna Black. I'm the fire chief in Duck, North Carolina on the Outer Banks. We're a small little town, a tourist destination that was once all volunteer and is now a combination department. And I've worked through those challenges and successes since 2006. When I came in as the chief, I was the only career employee with all volunteers. And now today, as of last month, we have 14 career staff and volunteers. So we've had to transition over the last several years to meet service demands. I also serve as the IFC's first vice president, and I really appreciate the work through IFC and especially VCOS. We have 2 VCOS reps on with us today that helped me as I've taken my journey through fire chief and getting to where we are with our department. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chief Black. Chief Windisch from
Yes,
Ponderosa, Texas.
Yes, sir. Ponderosa, Texas. Houston is our suburb, and we're an unincorporated county. Our district is about 12 square miles with 50,000 people, so it didn't used to be that way, of course. The growth has been tremendous. I've been with this department since 1975. Yes, I'm old, and still having a good time, and I think that's important for everyone in this position to have a good time as much as you can under the stresses of today. Our department is 3 stations. We are a public protection class 2. Yes, we have water, so there's the big number. And we've improved over the years from a 5 to a 3, then to a 2. And that's important for the residents of our district. We started our combination journey back in the 80s, believe it or not, that started with 1 part-time employee about 6 or 7, 8 hours a week. And today we have 21 full-time firefighters. We're getting in the process right now of hiring 6 more so that we can staff our number 3 station 24/7. So we'll have a lot more to talk about. As far as my career goes, I worked for Shell Research for 30 years, a blessed career there, and dual career with Ponderosa the whole time. So that morphed into where we are today, and it's been a good ride.
Thanks, Chief Windisch. Chief Cowger from Big Sky, Montana, you're up.
Thanks, Ed. My name is Rich Cowger. I'm the fire chief for Columbus Rural Fire District number 3. We're located in south central Montana. Got a little bit bigger district than Fred. We're about 900 square miles. We do that out of 2 stations. We do full transport EMS at the ALS level, as well as the fire protection. Our year-round population's much smaller than Fred's, only about 6,500 people. But we have I-90 running through our fire district, as well as the corporate headquarters for Montana Silversmiths, which is a Western jewelry manufacturer, as well as Stillwater Mining Corporation, which is the only North American producer of platinum and palladium in, well, in North America. That makes sense, doesn't it? We started out as a 3 departments, actually. When I first joined in the early 90s, we had a city and a rural, separate fire departments for city, rural, separate volunteer EMS. I became the chief of the rural in 2000, and we worked as a volunteer, and then we worked to merge the 3 organizations. Started off with the city and the rural fire department, and roughly about 2008. 2010, we merged with the EMS services as well, still all volunteer at that point. And then 2008 is when I started getting compensated and paid part-time. Went full-time in 2009, and have transitioned from the first full-time fire chief for Columbus to now we have 8 full-time employees, 6 resident volunteers, and about 35 volunteers at 2 stations, running about 1,000 calls a year. Up from, I think, the 100 and something when I started. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. I also sit along with Fred as a member of the VCOS board. Currently, Fred's serving as the treasurer, and I'm currently serving as the vice chair. So thanks for having us on, Ed.
Thanks, Chief, for being with us. Captain Lowell, Ester, I have you listed as a captain, but you have a rather unique situation. If you want to take the time to explain it to everybody and tell us a bit about your department.
Sure. I'm with the city of Mulvane Fire Rescue, and we're a small suburb south of Wichita, Kansas. And we sit right on 2 county lines, and I have fire district responsibility in 2 counties. I started out as a volunteer firefighter back in the late 70s. We were all volunteer, rose to the rank of a assistant chief, and then they decided to merge the city fire department and a rural fire department, much like what Rich was talking about. So I ended up on a full-time EMS services for a while, and I worked for Boeing Fire Department here in Wichita for about 6 years. And eventually I came back to the city of Mulvane, which has now became a Department of Public Safety. So I am the fire captain, which is the fire operations chief. I report only to the director of public safety. I have some staff members under me, but I would essentially be the chief of all operations on the fire department. We have 3 paid staff. I have a paid lieutenant that's here on the days I'm off. And of course, I answer to a public safety chief who his basic background is law enforcement. He had a little bit in EMS. We do not, other than first respond vehicles, we do not cover EMS. We have a separate EMS department here in the city. We run 2 stations. About 10 years ago, we received a casino from the state of Kansas that sets out on I-35, which we cover a 6-8 mile chunk of that, which is your main arterial from Mexico to Canada. So we have a lot of traffic there. We serve a population of about 7,500 full-time residents here on about 25 square miles, but our daily population is about, with the casino, varies up to about 6,500 people a day out there going through that facility. When it opened 10 years ago, we added a second station out there at that facility. And the fire department side, I have about 32 volunteers. I have 8 part-timers now that we've just put on in the last year or 2. And so we run an ISO at class 3. We run about 1,400 calls a year, fire and EMS. The volunteer fire department runs around 450 calls. But I have 1 paid duty officer on duty 24/7. So we first respond on most all medicals along with the EMS service. So I started out as a volunteer. I worked my way up to a chief, and then I left for a few years and came back and currently serve as the chief of operations for the fire department here.
Thanks, Chief. Administrator Arthur Howe, please tell us, our listeners, about yourself and your department.
Sure. Art Howe, and welcome everybody, and thanks for attending. I am the fire administrator for the town of Harpswell, Maine, small coastal town about 30 miles north of Portland, Maine. Unfortunately known as the scene of a fatal shark attack a year and a half ago. We also have the largest mileage of coastal mileage of any town in the state of Maine, so we're very maritime influenced. The town is actually consists of 3 private volunteer fire companies, and then a 4th entity, which is the Department of Safety, which I run. And we have anywhere typically from 6 to 8 part-time paid staffers that staff a more centralized station. We don't really have a central station, but a more centralized station that we staff Monday to Friday during the weekday. In terms of my background, I started as in a small combination department in Hanover, New Hampshire. I loved it so much I joined the all volunteer department of Vermont across the river. I've been a member of 8 fire departments, including full-time industrial, full-time career, all volunteer, and 2 combination entities, one being right now and one is the former chief of Ipswich, Massachusetts. It's been a fascinating ride, to say the least, and it's still a lot of fun. So that's a little bit about me, and I look forward to talking to you further.
Great. So I want to put a plug in here. 3 of our panelists, I know for sure, are part of the volunteer combination officer section at iChiefs. And I first became familiar with the VCOS several years ago when I was elected to the board to fill out a 1-year unexpired term for somebody. And I know that the VCOS has done a lot of great things with volunteer combination departments. And I also know that they've been heavily involved with the Lavender Ribbon Report and firefighter cancer. And I just want to put a plug in for the VCOS, letting our listeners know that they do quite a bit for the fire service. And my hat's off to the board and the officers of the VCS for the work that you do every year. So with that plug in there, I'd like to, and I'm going to throw the first question to Chief Black. How or why did a combination department become a reality in your community? And did the local government or the fire department initiate the discussions? You're muted, Chief.
You'd think after the last 2 years, you'd get that right with the muting. Sorry. My story is probably a little different to tell it for Duck in that Duck will be 40 years old. Duck Fire will be 40 in 2022. And this used to be just an unincorporated area of Duck. It was a fishing and hunting community that grew over time. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, the really only organized thing in Duck was the fire department. The Civic Association ran out of here. Most community members really involved in the county were probably on the volunteer fire department. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a boom. And the locals that lived here realized that things were changing and we needed to kind of take a hold of and control our own destiny. So there was a push to incorporate Duck into a town, which happened in 2002. So several fire department members served on that committee to flip that to a town. We had a vote on it. It was a big process. It was Government 101, great process for another day in a different webinar. But at the same time, service demands were changing. The volunteers were getting busier. You could see the boom coming. And our decision to look at changing the model came internally. We were concerned with town coming in that, we had a board and, the volunteer chief that got paid for some maintenance, but how were we going to answer to the town? And we knew things were going to get different. So it was an internal process. We had a committee that looked at what would it mean once the town incorporated if we let any paid employees fall under the town. So we weren't managing ourselves because we knew it was going to get difficult. So it was really an internal look. There was a decision at the time to take our current chief position and give it to the town and let the town manager be the boss and not us boss ourselves. And it also gave the advantage of a municipal employee with benefits and salary and oversight. So we agreed as an entity, a 501c3, we voted on it. We agreed to say from this day forward, any career employees will fall under the town of Duck. And that's how we made that first flip. Now, the intent was only to have the chief at the time, but since now we've grown and added more people. And so we have an interesting hybrid model. Duck Fire is still its own 501c3. All personnel are members of the fire department, but anyone paid is actually a municipal employee of the town of Duck who will turn 20 next year.
So what I'm hearing here is the fire department took control of its own destiny, put a plan together, went to the local government and said, here's our plan. And so it was a cooperative effort between the local government and the fire department.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Chief Windisch, I'll throw that same question your direction.
Okay, ours just took a little longer, but literally we have our own nonprofit. It's still called the Ponderosa Volunteer Fire Association Incorporated, a 501c3. And today it still operates very, very efficiently and effectively. Our dollars come from our district, our tax district, ad valorem and sales tax. And we'll talk about funding later. But the history here, and I think one of the successes that we experienced over the decades, our nonprofit board has only the fire chief on it and one firefighter rep. The other 5 are citizens. And, we call them elected from the community, but in this metro environment, there's not much election going on for that particular, for those positions. But again, I think that retrospectively, having non-firefighters on that board of directors keeps it stable and it keeps it focused on what the mission is. So that's just a look back of how we did it. With that, as we look forward into the decades, it was keeping up with growth. It was constantly trying to improve service with more people, as more paid people, be it part-time and then some full-time, and growing with the responsibilities that came with our exponential growth. Our big first growth area time period was in the late 70s, and then we had in the late 80s. There was a time in the late 70s where you couldn't buy drywall in the Houston area. It was being used every single day. And when I say the area, we're talking about a region of multi-millions of people right now. So that first big hit was in the late 80s. So again, we're looking back is a beautiful thing. We just worked very hard at trying to keep up. And it fell into place again with our citizen board of directors. And by the way, our tax board are citizens of the district. So that helps also to keep the focus on what we're supposed to be doing.
Okay, Chief Cowger, you got anything to add?
So, as I mentioned in my opening, our history kind of came from three different organizations. So the town of Columbus, which to put that in perspective is a town of like 2,000 people roughly, has had a fire department since 1915. The rural fire district was started in 1989 due to the fact that the town didn't feel they had the capacity, and the volunteer department at the time didn't feel they had the capacity to protect anything outside of the city limits. And in about mid 60s, I think, is when the volunteer EMS system started on their own. So when you look at that system and go, we had three different emergency service providers within a town of 2,000 people. We had two different fire stations. The ambulance was at one point parked inside one of the fire stations, and then believe it or not, there was a rift between fire and EMS, and they kicked the ambulance out. And and so so they went to a third building. And so then you had folks like myself come along that said, this is, when I was younger, I might have been kind of an overachiever, and I decided to join all three organizations, which ironically, when you found out behind the scenes, they were working against each other because we put policies in place that would prevent you from being on one of the other organizations, or we'd move our training nights to a different night. So you had to pick and choose, up to 3 nights a week when you were going to be gone and which training you went to. And finally, at a point, we kind of realized this was ridiculous, and that we were killing ourselves by trying to manage 3 organizations that in essence do the same thing. There was a little thing called pride in history and tradition that kept getting in the way of doing the right thing. So we originally, the EMS service was really the one that started to drive the merger in the aspect of they were missing their calls. And then so that bled over into where we were in the fire service side of things. We're having to pick that up. And so it was when I became chief in 2000, then we started working between the town of Columbus and the fire district to start to at least operationally work together. And I mentioned we had 3 different buildings. So depending on the call, you had to figure out which building you were going to go to, which apparatus you were going to get on, which piece of turnout gear you're going to wear. We finally kind of got everything put together in at least one building, even though our city attorney said he'd need some time to figure out how to make this thing all work. We did it despite him. He's retired, so I can say that now. And then and then by the time he rolled out the agreement, we said, thanks, we've already had it done for 6 months. But then it took us a little longer. In fact, it took us almost 4 years of negotiation with the EMS side of the house to bring them into the fold and to get everybody convinced that this was really the best thing to do when it came to customer service and service delivery overall. And that didn't fully happen about till 2011. So what you have today is, and I've transitioned from, initially it went from, my position was a city employee to where we did an interlocal agreement between the city and the rural fire district, to where I'm now a fire district employee. The fire district provides all of the fire service protection services and EMS for the town of Columbus under a contract and an interlocal agreement. And then the ambulance service eventually just merged with the rural fire district, and we took that over and have been running that since. So long story short, it was an internal drive. There were a few of us that thought we can do things better, and so far we've done that. And then we've kind of had to bring the political bodies with us. So imagine that we had a rural fire district board of trustees, which is elected. We had a city council, which is elected, and trying to get all those people on the same page to figure out that, to let up a little bit of control. They finally done it through the interlocal agreement, and here we're at today.
So what I've heard so far is that the fire departments themselves kind of drove the process initially, and then the local governments were brought on board. So Lowell and Art, do you have anything different than that? Was the impetus for your start pushed by local government, or did your combination department come about because it's what the fire department thought needed to be done?
In Mulvane's case, it was pushed by the government entities. We started out in about 1980 with a civil defense director that was had some matching funds. And at that time, we had volunteer fire on the city, we had volunteer fire on the rural, we had a volunteer ambulance service. And the rural fire and the ambulance all ran out of the civil defense headquarters under this director. And the EMS started about 69, the city fire, which was kind of a different organization. They started in 1905. And then the rural fire happened a lot later in 86. And the rural fire was pushed by the volunteer firemen. We went out, got the farmers on board. We wrote the petition to get the rural fire started. And so we had one paid director, and he was the first responder. And this poor guy worked 24/7. If he wanted to take a weekend off, he had an assistant that would take the truck for no pay in first response. But that was because, it took the volunteer ambulance 4 or 5 minutes to get out of the station. So that's kind of how, we got started many years ago that way. So then in the 80s, I think a full-time EMS captain was brought on, just due to the training and the paperwork and advances in the state EMS system that was requiring things. About 2000, the position I hold now was created as a fire captain. And a lot of that had to do with the training, the paperwork. We also started inspections. We had a big Main Street fire. We burned down 5 or 6 buildings, and we really didn't do fire inspections. And it was brought up that, if we want to save the town, maybe we need to be doing a little more of that. So that kind of brought the first full-time fire guy on board. Then about 2005, we added a second full-time fire position. And that was just to help in the daytime coverage, because they wasn't really letting us work over 53 hours a week without getting into the overtime issue. And then with the addition of the casino and the added calls we've been running at night, we ended up in 2020, just about a year ago, we brought on 8 part-time employees. But we had a city council member years ago that really pushed to join. He says, we've got 40 volunteers. We got 20 city firemen. We got 20 rural firemen. We need to combine these forces, and because we're running out of volunteers. And so about 1986, they merged these 2 fire departments, and they moved them into the civil defense building, and that's where EMS was at also. So it was really a push on the council side to do that. And that was about the same time the rural people were out organizing the rural fire district. So I answer to the city council. I also answer to a rural fire board. So I have two entities and I have two funding sources there that keep us going.
Okay. Art, do you have anything to add?
No, we just, we started internally within the fire department. Discussions started in really 2015 when one of the three volunteer companies was, sometimes limited to 1 or 2 people per response to even a structural fire calls. And, even though they had automatic mutual aid from the other fire departments within town, each of our stations, because of our geography, and so we're on the coast of Maine where you have these long peninsulas that stick down, and between our stations is 10 miles between our stations, which, by rural standards is not that far, but by suburban standards would be quite a distance. So, it could be, and at one point we were separated by bodies of water where it would take, literally we'd have to go back, years ago, we had to go back from Harpswell into Brunswick, north on Route 1, and then back down into Harpswell, which would take you anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes to provide mutual aid within your own town. So they began to see a need for at least some weekday daytime staffing, which we're doing now. And we provide 12 hours of coverage on a weekday, 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. And it's worked out moderately well, retaining staff, in this highly competitive environment is really, really challenging. So we've had I would say it's fair to say, given other entities, we've had a remarkable group of part-time people to date. And we hope to continue that, but the genesis was started within the fire company, the volunteer fire company.
So what I've heard some underlying things here, and two of them that stick out to me are the growth in your areas drove the process in some circumstances, in addition to not having enough volunteers are kind of the two things I'm hearing. I'm also hearing that, I remember when I was in the military and stationed in Wyoming and did classes in Nebraska, they had the city fire department and the rural fire department, and the trucks were even in the same building, painted the same way. But if the fire call was outside the city, that city fire truck could not go outside the city on a rural fire, and vice versa. Same fire department, same color of apparatus, just a different name. And I don't know where they are today, but I'm hearing growth, and in some cases, unexpected growth. For example, like in Duck, I mean, it just all of a sudden you had a big boom of population, and then to Fred's point in Ponderosa. So I've also heard that it took cooperation between the fire department and the local government officials to at least get you to where you are today. And I think that's important going forward. So my next question, and I'll start with Art since I finished with you last. Art, what issues or problems did you experience early in your process? I mean, if you could pick one thing that was like, oh my heavens, what would it be?
I can easily pick one thing, and that's a relationship built on trust. So I come in as a full-time paid employee, the only full-time paid non-police public safety employee here in the town. The town is about 5,000 year round, about 12 to 15,000 in the summertime. We don't explode quite like Duck, but we do definitely are much busier in the summertime, particularly on the medical front. But to come into a system that has been historically, as in 50 plus years, a 100% volunteer service, a very proud service historically, establishing credibility and trust was absolutely the number one agenda for me, and it still is the number one agenda. There are still people that don't trust the town, if you will, that think we're going to take over all the volunteer services, take away from them. In mannerism, philosophy, writing, and otherwise, I try to dismiss that as much as I can. We will, because of our geography and these long peninsulas, we will always need the three fire companies of the three stations where they are located, particularly in terms of medical response. We're doing about 800 calls a year roughly, but building and maintaining trust is, for me, the number one building block of a foundation and the number one challenge.
Okay, Lowell.
Well, when we combined in '86, the politics was just different then. And again, the city is the one that decided that they were going to combine the city department with the rural department. And the rural department was generally younger people on that department. And the city fire department seemed to be an older crowd. And of course, they did have some younger members, which were usually family of the older gentlemen that were in there. So when they kind of forced this combination on us, we did have an issue with people had their feelings hurt. And I think we ended up losing all but 2 or 3 of the city firemen. The whole idea of combining and putting the forces together really didn't work the way they planned. A lot of the city firemen left because they were mad. They moved their trucks into the rural station. They didn't get appointed chief. Somebody else was appointed chief. And so we went through that turmoil, and it took 5, 6, 8 years to kind of work through that. And that kind of, I think, helped support adding a couple positions, paid positions into the department, just to help stabilize, again, like they're talking the daytime responses and things. And that was probably, in the early years, that was probably our biggest hurdle to get over. And like I said, it took quite a while, but eventually we got some of those people back, and we grew from it. And eventually some of the rural guys all quit, but it all worked out. It was just that it was a very tedious time there when we combined.
Well, Lowell, do you think it had anything to do, kind of along Art's lines? Do you think it had anything to do with people not trusting one another? Or was it just they were so different groups of people?
There was absolutely a trust issue there. And also the first original guy that was the paid civil defense director, he had retired about that time. And they brought another gentleman in, and he didn't really earn the trust of much of anybody. And then there was a lot of political turmoil here in the city with our council members and other things that were going on. Police department also had a horrible time. We really didn't go public safety till about 2005. And that was just, it's some crazy state laws is why we had done that. Combining all the budgets under one umbrella. So, and none of my firemen carry guns, and none of us act as police officers other than a couple of investigators that I have on my department. But yeah, it was a trust issue there.
Okay. Chief Cowger, if you could pick one thing, an issue or a problem you experienced early in the process.
I don't know that I can just pick the one, but
Well, then pick several of them, Rich.
well, I was going to say that, like Lowell and Art both alluded to, I think, what I'll change the term to is managing the change. People are afraid of change sometimes, and this is not the way we've always done things. And so that was probably the biggest thing, is to get people to realize that we can do this and be okay. I had just a quick story, is I had one of the former fire chiefs and also a city council person, when we were trying to do these mergers. He came to me and he was rather upset, and we had a rather lively conversation about why we shouldn't be doing this. And I remember clearly him making the comment, "You just don't understand the tradition and the history that we have." And of course, he was much more my senior, and I was a young guy at the time. And I kind of piped back with the comment of going, "Well, Chief, I said, you do remember going through history class, right? And he looked at me and he's like, yeah, what's that have to do with this? And I said, well, you had a history book, which is made up of chapters. And all we're doing is starting a new chapter. I thought it was brilliant. He didn't like it so much. But it got the point across.
I like it.
All we were doing was starting a new chapter in what we were doing. Didn't erase the history and what we came from or where we'd been or anything like that. So I think that managing the change and making it palatable for people as we move through the transition, knowing, like Lowell said, we're going to lose some folks in that transition, and make it as comfortable for them to exit out of the system and respectable as possible, and welcome the new folks that are up for the challenge. I think was probably, it was an issue. I don't know that I would call it a problem. And I think the other problem that I would list out there is making sure that you maintain the need for the volunteers, making them feel needed as you transition into some paid people, because there's an easy transition to be able to all of a sudden now your volunteers think, well, I don't have as active part in the situation anymore. So it's easy for them to kind of wane by the side. But it's a constant issue to make sure that they know they're needed, wanted. They have to be there to make the system a success. It's not a paid staff or a volunteer staff. It's a us staff that we got to do to make this thing work.
Great. Chief Windisch.
Yeah, I want to comment on, and I agree with Rich all across the board there, Rich. That was well done. The around us in our county is huge. And there's about 34 fire districts in the unincorporated county. Within the past 8 or 10 years, 5 of those ended up in that situation of not going along with the change that was necessary. And those 5 volunteer fire departments are gone. Literally, those with the gold rule, and it doesn't have to be that way. If you continue to be mission centric, remember what we're here for, and manage that change. Thank you, Rich, on that again. The consistency of that change, just moving forward and remembering why we are here. That's my message based on experience in this area. Well, there was a time about 8 years ago, I don't remember the year, we actually ran another fire department in 47 and a half days of my life as they transitioned from one system to the other system. And I don't want to ever do that again. There's no need to do that. If we're in this business for the right reasons, you should never have to go through that. That's my message.
So I'm going to steal a line from Chief Brunacini. What I'm hearing is, if we all can remember one thing, we're in this for Mrs. Smith, it would help with a lot of these issues and egos at times, would it not?
Absolutely.
Chief Black, I want to finish that question with you.
Yeah, I think the 4 of you hit it. And, I'd say the success around our journey was, in the beginning, there was common purpose. No one wanted to take over the fire department. The fire department was established, was credible, was trusted. So it was easy to have that initial conversation like, oh, let's put the chief at the time under the municipality, but there was trust for the fire department. So with the common purpose, a lot of it was successful. But to Rich's point and how you manage the change, I think what got us early on and our biggest struggle was managing the expectation. So the expectation did change a little with how we were structured, and that took a few folks by surprise. But once we evened out and made sure the expectation of positions and things like that was identified, the common purpose was always there. It was the subtleties of expectation around the position or where we go from here. That would be probably the biggest challenge I think we had early on.
Okay. Fred, I'm going to start this question with you because you're the money man for VCOS, and I know you like talking about money. And it's kind of a 3-part question. How's your department currently financed? Is the current model sustainable? And if it's not sustainable, what alternatives do you have?
Okay. First of all,
Hey, Fred, I stay, when you lean back, I can hardly hear you. So kind of stay leaned into your microphone. There you go.
Okay, thank you. We are financed by our tax district, and just for the numbers game, it's 10 cents per hundred, which is $100,000 property pays $100 a year. And there are some exemptions and all that other good stuff. That brings in about $4 million. And then we have sales tax in certain parts of our district. And there's a long story behind that. Basically, the city of Houston has robbed the county in certain areas. Did I say that? Yes, I did. And so that brings in another approximate $2 million there. So that's running our department and our district on a little less than $6 million in today's world in a metro suburban environment. So that is a challenge in itself. Sustainability is going to be tough, especially with the cost today. I mean, as I'm sitting here, I got a couple of notes from, our number 3 station needs a water heater, circulation pump. It just kills me to pay a plumber to come out and do that, but we got to do it. And that's just an example of the cost today. The other cost today is the actual operational cost. And I'm going to do some sacrilege here. I have a little, see if everybody can see this. I'm an NFPA offender. Please don't shoot me. But I believe that we have allowed too many regulations to operate our agencies. I could go into a whole litany of things, and each and every one of those cost us money just to operate. I'm not talking salaries. I'm not talking insurance. I'm talking operational costs. And that just bothers me to the nth degree. What does an air pack cost today? $8 grand? Is that a good number? $7,500? And then to maintain that thing is unbelievable in today's cost. I don't want to talk about fuel because I come from the oil business, but literally the cost of the barrel of oil today, all of us are going to see significant increases in cost. So in our case, in our little district of 12 square miles, we are constantly lean and mean operating because we don't have excess funds. And I don't know of many fire departments that have excess funds. We're trying to survive. The big thing is try and make the right decisions as leaders so that you don't, there's an old saying, it's cost avoidance. That grew up with the BCOS a long time ago, but cost avoidance will help you in other ways to run your fire department.
So if your current model is not sustainable, do you have an alternative? I mean, do you have any other choices, Fred, to increase your revenue?
The answer is a quick no. The state of Texas, through its constitution, limits emergency service districts at 10 cents. We've been lobbying for 10, 12, 14 years to have a capital fund of 5 cents and an operations fund of 10 cents. Emergency service districts in Texas were never designed for our type of environment. The only thing we have going for us is growth, and that brings in more revenue. But literally, in our mature environment here in our district, there's not much open land left. And so all we get is tax evaluations going up. And then, of course, we know the national issues going on with trying to reduce property taxes, which is a big, big deal in Texas. So in our case, we have very, very limited methods. We can bring in a few bucks here and there, like billing for my other nemesis, automatic alarms, false emergencies. We can bill for that, but how do you collect it? Oh, there's a state law. So what? Blah, 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 all those things. But literally the big bucks in our area are not available, and we are not alone.
Okay. Chief Black, I'll let you go next.
So we're funded through, we are part of the budget process every year. So we are funded by taxpayer money. Again, we have ad valorem and a couple other taxes there. We also, with the incorporation We sell t-shirts still, and that helps support the volunteer mission, if you will, and allows us to do our annual banquet and things like that. So we still use that to support our support, but any operational things come through our municipality. And it is a challenge, right? I've in my time, I'll go down as the chief that spent the most money because I was the only career employee to now 14. So if you look at my tenure here, most of that cost has gone to people, right? The council's looking, where's the end to that, right? And I educate every year at our annual retreat, how do we balance service delivery and cost, and what is that magic balance? And we're constantly weighing that. But are we sustainable right now? Yes. I look around at our neighboring districts. I'm in a rural area, and that's the most common discussion right now is we don't have the volunteers and we don't have the money to flip it. So how are we going to get there? So again, I think this is a problem everywhere, and I think it's finding the balance and not a standard, to Fred's point, that works for your community to make it economical and safe. And it's not a one bullet fits all.
Chief Cowger.
Well, I'd start off with saying that is your department how is it currently financed? Well, through creative financing, which is completely different than money laundering. So don't use it as do interchangeably. My budget's interesting. One of the reasons I mentioned earlier that we did an interlocal agreement with the rural fire district, the city was managing it, moved it over to the rural fire district. In the state of Montana, the rural fire district is a political entity subset within the county. We have taxing authority, and the nice thing is when that money goes into that fire district, it stays there. So we don't have to fight general fund issues through the city, police, public works, yada, yada, that kind of stuff. So that was one of the things that we changed right off the bat, was to move that money into the fire district. Secondly, when I started hiring people, I did it under a SAFER grant, and it was predominantly to take on the EMS side of things. We were generating some revenue from that EMS response, but we knew it wasn't enough to sustain the staffing level that we needed, plus the operational costs. So we did end up actually creating then a ambulance district that overlaid our fire district. And if you think about the political side of things, we had the town of Columbus, which we have an interlocal agreement with them, which gives us a set contract amount of money from the town to the district. And we had the ambulance revenue that went to the district. And then we ended up creating an ambulance district that overlaid the fire district plus the town and a bunch of other incorporated areas in the county that didn't have EMS service. And to do that, we had to go to the voters and ask for their permission to do that, because that was a new taxable entity. And this kind of goes into your conversation of, is it sustainable? We had the foresight, or we hoped we had the foresight to actually ask for more money or more mills than what we thought we would need, so that we could sustain it out in the future. And we sold that to the public. We told them straight up front, we're going to ask for this, but we're going to shoot for this in our operational costs. If you'll give us that leeway, we're going to try and keep it as low as we possibly can for as long as we possibly can. And in the end, it did pass. It was a 3-1 in favor of the vote across the creation of the ambulance district. So that gave us the additional funding. Now, also created a separate political entity that we have to deal with, but through another interlocal agreement, all that money then comes into the pot. On the flip side, and then in addition to that, then we also have, we look at grants wherever we can. Of course, grants is not a sustainable function or sustainable funding mechanism. But we help that to supplant, or not supplant, that's the wrong word, to offset some like seasonal folks. We do a fuels mitigation program, so we can bring on other crews in the summertime to help us, especially during our wildland fire season. And then we, for our capital improvement type of stuff, we actually send trucks out on wildland fire contracts, excuse me, and through the summer. And then that's how we generate additional revenue. So we're not quite where I'd like to be to say we're completely sustainable. I think we'll probably have to go to the back to the voters within the next couple of years again to ask. But I think the big thing for us was to help the community understand what we needed and ask them if they wanted that level of service delivery, and then let them decide how much they were willing to support. And so far, it's worked in our favor.
Okay, Captain Ester.
I'm here. Sorry. I couldn't find the mute button. Yeah, we're kind of a similar situation. I have two funding sources. I have a rural fire district and I have a city. The city is obviously my bigger source of revenue, but I have to go fight for that money just like all the other city department heads have to. Luckily, I have a public safety director that does the fighting for me. I just tell him what I need. And then he says, well, that's not what you're going to get. And so here we go. But we run on about 3 mills here in the city. And my rural fire district, they had to go to a vote of the people when they formed a couple of years after they formed to buy a pumper. And so they got their mill levy set at about 6, which is about twice of what the city's is. So we have a contract between the fire district and the city, and they pay us close to 3 mills every year. They just pay that in the city general fund, which is supplements my revenue. And then they keep 3 mills to themselves. And so what the fire district does is they buy trucks. So they have about 5 trucks in my department, where the city only has 4 trucks in the department. And the whole idea was back in the 86, as I said, it got a little turmoil there when we combined the departments. So the rural fire district's idea was we're going to pay for the trucks, and then if things fall apart and we don't agree with the leadership with the city fire department, we'll take our trucks and go form our own fire department if we need to. And that has never happened. So they pay off the truck and they go out and they buy me a new one. And city of Mulvane, of course, is all hydranted. The rural fire district, we have tenders. Well, we have a few little areas in the city that isn't hydranted, so the tenders help support that. And it's worked real well for us with this relationship with the fire district and the city. But of course, again, like they were talking earlier, you know, an air pack alone, when I come on the department was $2,000, and now this last round we just bought it for $7,500 a piece, and we can't rely on grants. I mean, I get a grant once every 3 or 4 years, it seems like, and it's getting harder and harder as we get away from 911 to get grants because the money's just not there. We're going to take another big natural disaster or man-made disaster to get that grant money flowing back to the fire departments, I think. And we certainly don't want that to happen. But one of the things I do with my city council especially is north of me, I have Sedgwick County Fire Department, I have the City of Wichita Fire Department, and I have Derby Fire Department that are all paid entities. And the county department here, the county department's shrinking because the cities keep growing, and so they have to keep raising their mill levy just to support the staff they have. Their mill levy is about 18 mills to support the fire department. And I go to my council quite often and I say, you know, and well, at one point the county came to us and they said, well, we'd take over your department, but we're going to put our 18 mil, our fire district levy on the city above and beyond what you're already paying in taxes. And the city suddenly realized that, hey, this volunteer department at 3 mills is not a bad situation. And I bring that up to the council about every budget season. And it's, you know, the longer we can keep volunteers, and as long as we can keep buying them the best equipment we can get, keep them in good gear and good equipment so they want to come and they want to work, we can save a lot of these costs and expenses that we run into when we start hiring the paid people and having to, you know, pay the benefits and the retirements and everything that goes with the paid staff. So my city council has been really good on our end supporting the fire department. And it goes way above that 3 mills. I mean, because we use capital improvement program, and I just go in and fight with the other department heads. And look, I got to have a new truck. And I think the last one we bought was $480,000. And we replaced a truck that they bought for $35,000, 30 years ago. But you really have to educate your councilmen on the costs and inflation that goes along with this, and the amount of money you're saving with the volunteers versus you having to go to a fully paid department.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you have volunteers, but they're not doing bingo and chicken barbecues and that kind of stuff for their money. Am I hearing you right?
You are correct. And we are fortunate in that situation that the city sustains us 100, or the fire district in the city sustains us 100%. We really don't do any fundraisers. And in fact, the city, I have some money budgeted in my budget. So every year at Christmas, our volunteers get a little reimbursement check for gas and time they missed dinner with their family, and they get a little bonus at the end of the year. But no, we don't. So far, we don't have to do chili feeds and things to raise money for the department. And we're lucky there.
Okay. Art, your turn.
So we, Harpswell is financed internally through the tax and the mill rate. And we have an interesting challenge that we are the lowest mill rate of any town in Cumberland County, Maine, which is I think 26 towns. And we're very proud of having the lowest mill rate. It's a little bit of a problem for me when I look out longer term. Are we adamant about staying as the lowest mill rate in the county, or can we be flexible in that regard? Ultimately, it is the voters that will decide what our funding will be, of course. And one of the interesting things historically, with the coming from a town that was 100% based on volunteer service and is now a hybrid mix, but still predominantly, probably 90% volunteer based. The three departments, three separate corporations and volunteer departments, there's been some degree of competition between the three. And that's not always that doesn't always provide the greatest bang for the buck, if you will. So one of the things that we're trying to slowly to do is separate and educate on needs versus wants. There's a lot of things that people would like, but do we truly need that? And there are things that we need that are not considered wants that we're still not getting. So, I think we're sustainable through the short term and the midterm. Long term, I'm not so sure. We still have one of the three fire companies does a major summertime auction, in-house auction, at which they have raised approximately $50,000 a year towards their typically $200,000 operating budget for that one department. And of course, they've not been able to do an in-person auction for 2 years, and so that revenue's declined approximately 25%. It's been partially offset by ambulance reimbursement, which has been new for the three departments. All three departments are now getting or are at a reimbursement process, if you will, for all three services. So that'll help to offset that, but it's certainly not the answer. And we do, as a town, one of our challenges that we do, Maine is let me set the stage. So Maine has the highest median age of any state in the union. Harpswell has one of the 2 or 3 highest median ages of any town in the state of Maine. So we are very challenged demographically with an aging audience, and we're very challenged with the recruiting younger members into town and young families to move into town. We have limited services for young families. We do have some services, but we have limited services for families. We have a school system that is not particularly robust. So that probably is the town's number one challenge in the long run, is to attract younger families and set a longer term process for keeping the departments viable. You know, we have people that are still volunteering in their 80s, if you will. And when you go out night after night for someone that's fallen out of bed, you know, for which you may not get reimbursement because so-and-so has fallen out of bed and you're picking her up for the third time that week, it wears and tears on the volunteer system very, very strongly.
Okay.
So I think
So-
we're okay for short and medium term. Longer term, it's anybody's guess, really.
Ed,
Okay.
let me add a little bit, please.
Sure, Fred.
I want to go back to the grants thing. For those of our listeners out there who want grants, encourage it, but it isn't easy. It has gotten more and more and more difficult to justify, to fill in the blanks and all the other stuff. In our case, like Rich, we had a SAFER grant several years ago that kickstarted our hiring process. We had for 3 people. So definitely it helped. And along with that, we were at the tail end of the approval process. They actually called, I had to make a decision within 48 hours because they were almost out of money and somebody turned it down and blah, blah, blah. But we did get it and I appreciate that. We've also had 3 AFG grants over the years. Once again, it's more and more difficult, and it's really difficult for smaller agencies to be able to go through that process that is now standardized for the AFG system. It doesn't mean you can't, but it's very, very difficult. End of story.
Okay, so if you're following the script, for those of you on the panel, I'm going to skip the one question because I think we covered some of it earlier when we talked about some of the pitfalls or things you might do differently. So we've talked about some of the doom and gloom. Let's talk about some of the success stories. So if each one of you, Chief Cowger, I'll start with you, share one of your greatest successes through your entire process.
Well, it's actually been for us, I think the fact that we've WIT combination has helped to create a more sustainable atmosphere for our volunteers. And what I mean by that is we probably have more volunteers now than we have in the past. And we have more active group, and we still have those that are on the fringes, we'll say. But we realize they add something when they can, and that's good and acceptable. But we've transitioned into, you know, going from your traditional wait till the pager goes off, come from home type of response to now that we have paid staff in the station and some resident volunteers, which is, you know, kind of that another mix in there, to where we're actually having volunteers come in and stay the night in the stations, do duty shifts in the stations. So even though there's only 2 paid people on duty at any one given time, probably sometimes at night, there's 7 or 8 folks in the station, covering calls and doing the thing. So, you know, it's actually been a recruitment tool for us, and we've kind of migrated into an aspect of where we're kind of a farming department, if you want to call it that, because through our processes, we can get our folks trained up to now they're pretty appetizing to some of the career organizations around. So we end up losing a lot of folks, but that's okay, because we'll grow some more. But I think that's been one of the successes that we really strive to instill in all of our folks, paid and volunteer, that if the other side could do it by themselves, we wouldn't need the other ones. And that goes both ways. If the volunteers could cover all the call, the increase in call volume, we wouldn't need the paid staff, and for the paid staff to keep from getting too big of egos, that if they could do it, you know, or if the vice versa, I guess.
Gotcha.
That it takes both of them to make the system work. So there's not one's better than the other. We're both here to support each other.
Okay, well, you know, that's kind of contrary to what I've heard from some others where they say, well, we started the combination department and we lost volunteers. And you're telling me in your case, you've actually gained volunteers even by going to a combination department with paid staff, which is, in my opinion, an absolute success story. Art, I keep going to you last all the time, so I'm going to hit you second this time. Share with us one of your biggest success stories, if you will.
Well, this will be a very tiny slice of success, but it is arguably the most prolific success we've had, and the one that's most well received by the community. And that is that I operate a durable medical equipment cache. So I have in my domain, I have wheelchairs, walkers, hospital beds, crutches, shower chairs, rollators, walkers, that kind of equipment that has been donated by folks in the community. As I talked, we're very challenged demographically, very much a senior population in town, and we're actually going in the wrong direction for our median age. Actually, I have three requests pending, if you will, when I finish the webinar here. One of the big things that I deliver that medical equipment. I don't like people to come here and get it from me directly. I like to deliver. And what that does is several things. It allows me to build in a very small way some element of trust by having a direct relationship with a consumer, with someone in need. And often that person in need may be someone that has a physical, mental, economic hardship, if you will. So I'm getting into people's homes who I would consider to be overall at higher risk. And when I get into that home, I can then do, at the very least, a passive safety inspection. I have big eyes and big ears, and I look for things like handrails on the stairs, scatter rugs on the floor, even going so far as leather recliners versus fabric recliners. And there's a difference. Night lights in the bathroom. Is the number posted for the house, and is it visible from the outside at night in a hurricane, in a wind, snowstorm, etc.? That program has been widely received and hailed by townspeople, and I don't think they'd let me give it up now. I may need to delegate more of that over time, and I'm just at the cusp of doing that. But that program, and it also allows me, I'm going to put in a number of free smoke detectors and carbon monoxide alarms that way too, because we have a program where people can access those if there's a hardship case. And it's at my discretion what I consider to be a hardship case. Even though we have a great number of affluent people, we still have a deep pocket of people with a very dire financial need, if you will, and a lot of medical and emotional issues.
So that success, to me anyway, sounds like it's certainly outside of what the typical fire EMS company does in their community. And
it absolutely is.
You're to be commended for that, and it's certainly outside the box of what most of us think of fire and EMS doing in our community. So my hat's off to you.
But part of that is also so if I can go in and deal with a scatter rug or handrails on the stairs, if I can prevent that next superfluous EMS call from happening, that's the success to me. Or if you can put in the smoke alarm that actually operates and keeps someone safe, that's the success. It's not just the physically doing it, but it's hopefully preventing a call in the future that may be not totally necessary.
Okay, Lowell.
Our success, a lot of things I think are a success, but they're kind of hard to put into words. One of the things we've run into, a lot of my daytime help, I had some city employees that were meter readers and some parks people that mowed lawns and some different things. And as time has moved on, we've now got electronic meter readers and water readers, and they send a signal into the city hall. And so some of these positions I had as daytime help volunteers that the city would let come assist me. They're not there anymore. These people moved on to jobs that they couldn't get away from and come help be my daytime help. So by going to the combination department and having a couple full-time people here during the day, I mean, that's been a big improvement in the department. Mind you, we're a bedroom community for the city of Wichita. I mean, we've got had a lot of aircraft workers. And so, you know, my town just packs up at 7:30 in the morning and they head north, and there's a handful of us here and the school kids and here we are. And I know all the other departments here are probably in some similar situations with a lot of that. So, you know, by going into the combination department, we've been able to supply firefighters with a much quicker response time. It all kind of boils down to what are the citizens of your taxpayers? What are they happy with the service you're providing? And that's what we're doing. We're providing a service to the community. And most people probably don't even think about it until their house catches on fire or they need an ambulance. You know, it's just a big insurance package, and that has helped sustain or moved us, I guess, into a combination department with some paid staff and part-time people, getting that response time down and having the people there during the day. I mean, I have 5 auto aid agreements and I have about 7 mutual aid agreements, but you know, we talked earlier about the increase in EMS calls that are going on and how the volunteers they get tired of going and picking the same people up every other night. And so like the paid staff has helped. And I have the largest volunteer force I've had in years. I've got about 32 volunteers along with my 10 part-time and paid staff people. And that's probably the largest we've ever been. And I do have paid departments north of me. So they come here, they get experience, and I have the same problem with the people. They get their national certifications, and sometimes we lose them to the bigger departments. Hopefully they'll still continue to live here and volunteer with us. But yeah, it's we're kind of a farming community for the other departments. So.
Okay. So before we move on, I just want our listeners to know, I only have about 2 questions left. And typically we go about an hour or so with these. Our marketing director sent me a message a little bit ago wanting to know if we could start with questions and answers. And I told him I'm not sure, which was code for no, we're not going to stop. Because this stuff, I mean, look, we're getting a lot of positive comments in the chat and stuff. So if we run 2 hours, we run 2 hours. If we go to an hour and a half, we run an hour and a half. I've waited a long time to get this panel together, and I'm not going to cut it short. If there's people on here that need to drop off and need to drop off, this is being recorded. It'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel so people can download it later and listen to the rest of it or share it. So I just wanted our listeners to know where we're at in the program so they know what their expectations are. Chief Windisch, I don't think I've hit you up yet on that question.
I don't have a lot of success stories about what we went through because ours was nothing hugely successful. It's been consistent. It has been constant improvement. So nothing in particular that we do that I can think of right now steps out of me. My message to the listeners here is take your time, think about what you're going to do. Can you afford it? Can you sustain it? And just make continual improvement.
Fred, I think I'm going to jump in. That is actually a huge success to say it's consistent and constant, because that's the ultimate challenge. You know, usually we're talking about there's a change in service, there's a decrease in volunteers, but that is probably the best successful statement you can say.
I would agree. Chief Black, what do you want to share with us?
So
and
I think
you can't steal what Fred just said. You got to come up with your own.
I jotted a couple things down because I didn't want to forget them, but for our small area, it's a tourist destination. There's a big push from the town to, do events and things for those that come in and for the community. And I think that our change to a combination model has provided value added, because we're not only more responsive to just the call, we're better responsive to the community. And that's through our career personnel and our volunteer personnel. We could go do chalk art at town hall with the kids at 10 o'clock on Thursdays, because I have folks here that can do that. It's part of their day. We can go do smoke detectors. We now have taken over fire inspections and align it with our pre-planned program. So there's value added to having folks sit here 24/7, not just for the emergency call, because those aren't every minute of every day, thank God. The other piece, and I think Lowell might have hit on this, the longevity of our volunteers. They can turn the pager off if they need to for a night, because they know it's covered, and not run the 3 fire alarm activations at the same location or whatever. It's definitely helped to lengthen the service for some of our older members, especially, to be able to know they have a night off, or to take it off EMS calls and just listen to fire calls. So we've had these other value added pieces that aren't just response to the call.
Thanks, Chief. So I'm going to start with Arthur this time, with Art Howe. And if you don't have a crystal ball and you can't answer this, that's okay. What do you predict for the future? The future holds for volunteer fire service as well as combination departments.
Hey, give me the tough one, Ed.
Well,
So, if I think particularly, well, I think about things both locally, but I think about things regionally, statewide and nationally in scope too. And I think the volunteer service will continue to be very, very challenged. And Fred held up his interesting NFPA little sign earlier in the presentation. And I think we've got to provide some relief for people in terms of our incredible expectations and the level of training. And I say that with a caveat that nothing to me is more important than effective training. And I don't consider myself to have mastered that or mastered that with my firefighters. But I think training is, if I go into a department and I look at their training, if you will, or how firefighters are trained or what they're doing, that to me is the number one measurement of success within a department or within a culture. So I think we've got to figure out a way to provide some relief for people, for volunteers to continue to want to be part of this unbelievable culture and an opportunity. I think also, and I've tried to instill this from day one, that the volunteers and any paid personnel really should be treated equally. One is not better than the other. One is not professional, one is not volunteer. I don't use the term professional. Well, I do use the term professional firefighters, but that can encompass volunteer and career firefighters. So I'm constantly separating, paid equals professional. That doesn't wash in my book. So I've always tried to treat the firefighters equally. I try to incentivize and encourage my people that are on duty, paid in the station. They are the best spokespeople we have to recruit and retain people. And in fact, I can think of 4 volunteers right now, and there may be more that are in the forces embedded within our 3 departments, our 3 volunteer departments, because of activities generated by people that were working as a paid firefighter. So, we've got to find a way to provide some relief from the training and continuing education burdens. It's actually, I would say, particularly acute in the EMS world, even more so than fire, probably. I mean, our demands for recertification are robust, and robust to the point of discouraging, if you will, to some people. And we're going to be challenged. We've been very fortunate, in this town of 5,000 people, we probably have 75 volunteers spread among the three companies. We probably have 15 to 20 people that are interior trained firefighters. Now, the problem, of course, is during the weekday, you may only get 3 or 4 of them, plus the 2 of us as paid members of the force. So, we've got to, I think we've got to go further as a community in offering incentives to volunteers. And some of those may be tax incentives, length of service award programs. I mean, it's a host of different ways that we can incentivize volunteers to some degree. There's no
Okay.
magic wand on this one. It just takes hard work, incredibly hard work.
All right. Well, I'm going to go right across the screen. Chief Windisch, what do
Well,
you
they-
predict the future holds?
I think it's, we've been using the word challenge. I think especially in higher populated areas, the volunteer service is gonna go away. That's just the way it's trending right now. I would like to expand on Art's. We still have volunteers, and we're challenged today because of that training thing. We start them off as a minimum of firefighter 1. And now the trend in our area is to start them at firefighter 2 so that they can get their full certification. And as an old volunteer here, I'm saying, how much is enough? And yeah, echoing what Art says. But even in our hiring process and trying to maintain the confidence in our volunteers, we have a question in our personal interviews with our potential hirees. What is the difference between a volunteer and a paid firefighter? And that in itself creates a really good discussion, as well as fits the culture of our organization. As we know, the only difference is salary. It's still the same fire. It's still all blah, 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 all that stuff. But literally, that's a culture within your organization. Going to this EMS recertifications, I sit here in this black chair and I ask myself, why do we have to have X amount of numbers, depending on what state you are, where you are, of EMT recertification, and then you still have to take a CPR course? I'm sitting here going, why do we let that happen to us? We're doing it on a daily basis as responding EMTs. We're doing CE already, and here's another course to go to that costs our systems in some manner. So the future of the volunteer is going to be challenged because of all these requirements that continue to pile on. And then we have our local economies, our local married with children. How many sports do the kids do today? All of these things that take away our time away from our fire departments. End of lecture.
Okay. So to this question, and I'm just going to throw this out to the rest of the panelists. Do any of the other panelists want to weigh in on that question?
Yeah, I will.
Chief Black,
I will
go
too.
ahead. You had your hand up first. Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah. Now you got to the passionate question, right? Because what is the future? And I agree with Art and Fred. I think, and Rich, I think you used the word earlier. We need to start looking differently at our departments, and it matters on where you are. It's different for me in Duck than Rich in Montana. We have to look at it as a system. Does everyone need to be firefighter 2, fire officer 3? What is the system you need in your area to provide a level of service that's required? And what does that look like from a certification piece versus a training piece? Because I'm all about the training, Art. I mean, I can train a firefighter without giving them a sheet of paper and they're going to have the same skill sets. How do we make that work within the system? I think we need to look at how we do that within a department and clarify roles and expectations. I have a ton of support firefighters. I've done a presentation on this. Rich and Fred have had to hear it, I'm sure. And I have support firefighters that can hold an exposure. They're not going to go running in the burning building. They can help car extrication, but they're not firefighter 1 and 2 certified, but they can help provide part of the system needed for certain calls. So I think we need to look at that differently. That's how we're going to keep our volunteers. And then they know they can help to this level when they're available. The second piece is, I don't still think, and I talk about this at the IC level, this is why I have to get it out, is we need to continually educate. I don't think our communities know what we have and don't have. I think they assume. And I don't think it's for Donna and Duck or Art where he is or any of us alone. I think it needs to be on a bigger scale. I think it needs to be on an IFC scale. And that's something I'm working at as I go towards the presidency. But I don't think the communities understand what they have and what they don't have. And that's an energy that is difficult for all of us, especially small departments just trying to keep the lights on and keep responding. So I'll leave it at that, but thank you.
Great. You hit on an excellent point. A lot of times, those of us in leadership roles in the fire department, we think we know what the community wants. We do what we have to within our own departments, so we can provide what we think the community want or should have, when in fact, the community might not even want the level of protection that we think they should have, or they can't afford the level of protection we want to provide to them. So to Chief Black's point and points that were made earlier, sometimes I think we all need to do a better job of educating our publics and ask them, what is it you want? To include our local government officials, because a lot of times I don't think our local government officials, and I'll put the blame on the fire department in a lot of cases, we don't educate them on what we can and can't do for whatever reason. And I say that across the board. It may not be the case in your community, but as a whole, I don't think we do a good job of telling the public what we can and can't do. And sometimes I think we keep secrets from our local governments when we shouldn't. And I just make that as a broad statement. So Rich, you had your hand up right after Chief Black.
Yeah, I was going to challenge Fred, and those of us that know us know I challenge Fred probably on more occasions than what I know. But, to go back to some of Fred's comments, I think depending on how we look at the volunteer system, I tend to think it's still alive and got a good heartbeat. But Donna stole my line. We have to think differently. We cannot sit there and continue to use a service delivery model that we developed in 1984 or whatever the case may be, that sat there and said this worked for us then. If we continually think down those lines, we're doomed to failure. Simply because nothing else operates the same way as it did back then. And so, and to think that the transition to combination, sometimes people think, well, if we do that, in some cases, maybe that means that's a failure on the volunteer part. And I don't think that's the case. I think when we looked at it and said, what do we need the paid staff to do? And our line of thinking was, we need our paid staff to be able to do those support functions in the background that make it possible for the volunteers to respond. So we need paid staff to work on getting good quality training out there and available, so when they come to train that night, it's ready to go. We need the paid staff to make sure that maybe that equipment's ready to roll. Not alleviating some of those responsibilities from those volunteers, but I've always said volunteers like to do two things really well: train and respond. And that's what really, while we focus our paid staff, is to go, if they respond a lot, don't get me wrong there, it's probably the majority of the time, as it turns out being, but by them taking care of a lot of those other functions and allowing the volunteers to do what the volunteers can do when they can do it, it goes back to saying, well, we think we've got more volunteers now than we've had in the past. So I think those two, we see the rise in the combination systems. I think that's going to continue to rise across the United States. I think it's probably the fastest growing trend that we see. But I don't think that's a death blow to the volunteer system, as long as we're willing to think outside the box and look at things and how we deliver service differently.
Lowell, last but not least.
Well, a couple points mainly to reiterate, because we've discussed most all this, but like Donna said, one of the important things there, you've got to have the right people in the right place. and you got to know your volunteers. And some of the things Rich touched on there, yeah, the firefighter one training, we have a new member class. We bring people in, we tell them up front, this is our department. You're still going to continue to train your rest of your career here. And we've found the last 10, 15 years that if we bring 6 people in, we're going to lose 3 of them by the first year. And it's about a 50% save rate on our new member class. And maybe we don't do a good enough job screening them when they come in, but they get in and they realize this training just doesn't stop. There's so much going on, or they realize that, I don't want to put on 50 pounds of gear and go running into a house that's 1,000 degrees. It's not what I had envisioned. And you're right, the paid staff, just the grant writing, I could almost use full-time grant writer. But I think a lot of the volunteers, there was a comment in the chat earlier about the fact that, the volunteers are going to let the paid people do the cleaning the trucks and washing the hose and testing the hose. And, I've heard that for 20, 25 years. And I don't hear it at our station. I've heard people talk about it, but the paid staff, again, it goes back to trust. And Arthur had brought that up earlier. The paid people have to show that they're doing and what they're doing. And I think most of my volunteers realize that the amount of work that goes into the paid positions. I don't have guys sitting around watching TV all the day. Those are EMS people. No, it's a joke. But, there's I see the future, the combination departments are going to have to grow. I honestly don't know how some of the all volunteer departments that are around me, how they get by, how they get the things done that they do.
Okay, so I'm going to skip the last question we had because I want to get into the questions we have from the audience. This first question, Chief Black, is directed directly to you. It says, Dennis Fowler, I've been to Duck this past summer. Nice town. So do the paid town fire employees run the calls company, or does the Duck volunteers?
Yes, so both. So we have a crew on shift 24/7, that's career. Our volunteers will come and ride with them, and then they also respond to the pager and will staff the second piece for second calls or for those calls. So maybe the majority of the people you see on a call now in Duck is career staffing, but volunteers will ride with them. And you know what? Thank you for asking, because you can't tell, and that's how it should be.
Great. So the next question, and I'm not going to ask all the panelists to jump on these. So it says, great. This is from Douglas DeBest, and I can answer this one. Great session. I love hearing the different perspectives. Will the participants get a certificate for attending? Thanks for hosting. The answer is yes. As soon as I can get things put into the system and make sure everything works the way it's supposed to, you'll get a certificate electronically. This question comes from John Story. What have you found to be the best way to manage the change and focus on the future? In essence, focusing on those that get the mission without completely discrediting those that don't. Who wants to jump on that one? Art, I see you leaning in. You want to go first?
Sure. And I'm guilty in some way on this too, but when you have the foundation for many organizations is their mission, vision, and value statement. Make that, if at all possible, make that an inclusive process. Firefighters really want to be owners of what they're doing. They don't just want to be told and receive it passively. They want to be active owners of the organization in a myriad of different ways. So, give them the tools, get them to help you, delegate as much as you can, and have fun in the process. It is really okay. It's not just okay. It's really critical in a high stress occupation like we're in to have fun. And I don't mean to have fun at the expense of others, but it's okay to laugh. It's really healthy for us, and we don't do that often enough.
Rich, you had your hand up. Fred, I'll let you go next.
It goes it goes back to your comment earlier about Brunacini and taking care of Mrs. Smith, right? Is to sit there and go, really, it's not about us. It's about the community that we serve and what we do for them ultimately. And by doing the right thing for them, which sometimes means some change and some alteration in how we do things, will be the right thing for us, because then the community turns around and supports us. And so to get everybody to buy into that vision, and unfortunately, not everybody will. There will be some that have either alternative reasons for being there or attitudes or something, and just be respectful of those. And as I've always told our folks, is it's okay when somebody leaves. We want them to leave graciously and on their own terms rather than ours. But sometimes that's what we have to do too, is that here's what the mission is, get everybody to buy into it and realize how that benefits us as well. And then those that can't, if try and find them a different spot in the organization. If they can't, then there's probably another club or a group out there willing to have them participate in their function as well.
Chief Windisch?
Yeah, I want to get into the weeds a little bit with this, because the question is, how do you do it? I believe that inclusiveness with our members is very important all across the board. So how do you do that? So if we look at changing into the future, you base that on statistics, not on emotions. Again, I can look backwards, and hindsight's beautiful. So when we're making 135 runs a year and it goes to 1,000, something has changed there. So you have to adjust appropriately. So I'm not a big fan of strategic planning, but I am a big fan of business and operational planning. There is a difference. Strategic is way up here, and I want to be more into the hands-on. What can we do as an organization to make change, to make us better? This goes back to what Rich was just saying about the mission stuff, always part of that. I remember one session we had, and for those of you that know and love Ken Farmer at the National Fire Academy and North Carolina, long-term friend of mine, but we had him come in for a weekend, and our boards of directors and our firefighters and everybody, even our radio person, the vendor, was at this mission planning. And I just remember the excitement of everybody participating in an equal level versus from top down stuff. So the question is, how do you do it? That's one way.
Okay, so Chief Black, you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I think it's really communication is key to communicating the expectation. And at the end of the day, whether we're paid or volunteered to do any task, right? Pick anything. We want to feel valued. We want valued, and we want to feel like we have a purpose in helping whatever the mission is. And so if you can communicate expectation and everyone's feeling like they're contributing back to what the mission is, that I think that really helps, and it changes. And I think the biggest fear we all have, especially when you look at volunteer departments trying to go to combination departments, it's a fear that we failed, and someone hit on it earlier, but it's not necessarily a fail, it's just a change, and we don't want to admit that. And sometimes we hold that so tight that we're going to miss the boat and need to do something, but
That
it's
goes
not
back,
failing.
kind of go back to what Chief Cowger said early on. It's just a new chapter in the history book. I like that, Rich. I'm going to steal it and use it if I can remember it. So this next question is just a simple yes or no. Well, a yes will do. Okay. I may have missed it, but is anyone using an inspection program to offset costs? Chief Cowger, yes or no?
No.
Chief Black?
No.
Art?
No.
Chief Windisch?
Can't.
What'd you say?
Can't.
Can't. Okay.
That means no.
Okay.
You
Chief
have to
Ester?
be different.
Well, they were different. I told you.
Chief
that.
Ester?
Absolutely not. But
Okay.
we did use inspections to help fund a paid position to have an inspector to go out there to help loss prevention. But we can't use that to fund this now.
Okay. This next one could get kind of convoluted. So, and we're coming up on 2:45 here. So I'm hearing a lot, or all of you are funded through some type of district. And this is from Tyler Olson. In my area, the community is used to getting service for free. We face the challenge of opponents using this free argument as justification for not moving the department forward. Any thoughts on how to overcome in places where fire districts are not an option? Chief Cowger.
There is no such thing as free fire service, plain and simple. You know, what we've got to do to folks is, and somebody else said this earlier, is they have to understand that there's a cost. Just because your volunteers don't get a paycheck, there isn't a volunteer price for a fire truck, is there, Fred? You bought enough of them. Okay. There isn't a volunteer price for turnout gear. There isn't a volunteer price for the fuel that we put in the trucks or anything like that. It's so sometimes in our own disservice, we have a tendency to sit there and go, well, we're just a volunteer organization and we'll rely on bake sales because maybe that's our only option. But what we really need to be doing is telling people truly what the cost of service really is. We've had an argument in Montana for years about covering our firefighters with workers' compensation. And I've stood up in front of legislative committees and told them, if we can't cover folks in workers' compensation, as far as I'm concerned, because the argument's been, well, do I put fuel in the trucks, or do I put tires on the trucks, or do I pay workers' compensation? And my response is, that's not a comparison. If you can't insure your people, don't worry about the rest of it, close the doors, because if your community can't support the function of your folks, then have a nice day. Find something that's a lot less catastrophic that happens to you at the end of the day to do for fun. You know, and that's an easier said than done. We could have a whole conversation on that later, but there's no such thing as a free fire.
So, and I agree with you. And so we don't leave this, because we could talk about this one subject all day, the rest of the day for another 2 hours. But I think everybody touched on it earlier. One, our local government officials have to truly understand that it's not free. And as you said, Chief Cowger, there is no special price for the volunteer fire department when you buy a fire truck. And the public needs to be made aware of. But to Chief Windisch's point earlier, we have to do it with data, with factual information. We got to keep personal opinions out of it, and we have to use factual information and educate the public with fact, not our own opinions. And same with our local government officials. Is that a true statement? Does anybody disagree with that statement?
Yeah. I've had the opportunity in Duck, our town manager established a retreat every February. It's not a retreat. We don't get to go someplace cool and hang out. It's at town hall, but it's an opportunity. We get an hour and a half to discuss the year previous and set up for the budget next year. So the first year I started with data, and I went through EFO. I drank the Kool-Aid, so I'm very data driven. And I have carried that. I have the same data set since the day I started. And every year I show the same simple graphs. They're not complicated math because I am a firefighter. But over time, the data spoke. I could have given anyone my clicker and said, give the presentation, and you could see the change in volunteers. You could see the service delivery. And even the mayor got used to me saying, you got a slide for that, don't you? Because I'd have a slide of data for that. But what it did is the trends showed where we were starting to have changes, and you can see where we added people after that. And I didn't have to be emotional about it. It wasn't personal. It was, this is what the data is showing us. It's very powerful, and it doesn't, I think people get afraid of it because they want to make it complicated. It's not complicated. Simple data will tell your story. Thank you.
Okay. So Fred?
One little comment, and this is pretty much on this particular question posed. Are you a social organization or are you a mission-centric organization? Yeah, you got to have some social, but the primary part is the mission. So over time, that social part diminishes, doesn't go away from where it used to be. And remember, I've been there and done that. I've been a volunteer since '72, courses through my veins, but that social part goes away sometimes.
Okay, so the next question is from Matt Alto. It says, how do you address an equal hiring practice in hiring from a volunteer experience only pool or applicants with no experience who can go from hero to zero? Additionally, is the later considered even if the former, while qualified, not be the best representative of the community? Anybody follow the question? I need to read it again.
Let me go at it. I'm sorry to speak so much, but create your own system unless you're driven by law to do something else. Even right here, because we're a nonprofit, we get a little more flexibility. We go through the steps of all this waste of time, and then we finally get to the interview. That's where the rubber meets the road. I heard Donna say earlier, I can train a firefighter. We can train a dog, okay? Not the same, but you need people with personality who can live and work together. That's the big part in our system. Do they have a certificate? Yes. Are they all the same? No. Create your own system.
Okay.
I'll
Anybody
check-
else want to?
Yeah, I'll jump in there because we've had to evolve over that process too, of how we hired our first few versus how we hired in this. I have 3 new positions in the last several months, and we've had to adjust our hiring practices around how we can hire. So we start with what we call a physical agility assessment. It's skill based. Whether you're volunteer paid or you watched a lot of online videos and got your certificate, however you do have to have certain qualifications, but it is skill based. It shouldn't matter, right? And what I tell my folks, we have a 3-level process, and I said first thing I'm looking for is good humans, right? Good people to work in the fire department. And do they have the basic skills? We can tweak and fine tune and do other things. To my point, clear expectations of what it takes to get in the door to be an entry-level firefighter. And it's developed around what we do here. Yes, you do need certifications or almost complete certifications and done within 6 months, but are you a good person? Do you meet the needs of our community? Do you want to be here? And can you pass the basic skills? It's not difficult.
Chief Cowger?
So if I'm following his question right, I was going
Yeah, I
to
hope so.
tag on to Donna. You know, we treat our hiring process for our volunteers almost identical to our paid staff. So even our volunteers will go through an interview process. They do go through background checks, all of that kind of stuff. Yes, the paid staff is a little bit more in depth just because of that other things, but those key things that Donna just talked about, you know, is we've been through that process where if you had a pulse and you could make a mist on a mirror when you held it up in front of their face, by golly, we took them on. But we've got to the point where saying that's not the best move anymore. That they do have to fit. They do have to fit our community. They have to understand what service delivery looks like for our organization. And just even as a volunteer level, some of those folks aren't going to make the cut. And that's again, looking outside the box of thinking that we had to bring everybody in because volunteers were short. What we found is if we were more selective on our volunteers to meet what our community needs were, and that was the kind of people that we got in, then we actually started getting more volunteers and better quality.
All right, I'm going to move on to the next question. Do you all feel that it's realistic? This is from Jim Rosenbaum. Do you all feel that it's realistic and financially sustainable that in a setting where there's a merger of 4 fire departments into a single new entity that operates as a 501c3, or is it more financially stable to operate as a fire district that institutes a fire tax? My concern is there's already too much competition in the nonprofit sector. They are, after all, the same donated dollar. Fred, you're a money man. You want to take that one first?
I think it's all local. I don't
Okay.
think one is better than the other.
Okay. And look, I know here in Pennsylvania, we can't create fire districts. It's all based on municipal boundaries, and the fire tax comes from that. I know there's legislation pending and talk about creating state law to allow for fire districts, would give them the opportunity to become a taxing authority et cetera, but I don't know where the legislation will go. Anybody else want to address that one quickly?
Yeah, so like in
Chief
Montana,
Cowger?
yeah, in Montana, we have what they call a volunteer fire company. Under state statute, it's recognized, but they're not a taxing authority. So fire districts are a taxing authority with a subset of government. So it depends on what your mission is and how you want to go with that. But to me, I'm a fan of the fire districts if that's available.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to the last question. Have any of you had to go through any type of forced merger with any of your volunteer organizations? If so, how did it go? Anybody have to go through a forced merger?
Well, our city and rural department went through a forced merger and we survived, but it took 6-8 years to really get our feet on the ground because like I had mentioned earlier in this, everybody gets their feeling hurt. There's can only be one chief. And that's where you run into issues with merging fire departments. And again, I think it was Arthur that talked about the fact that, you have to have that trust of the firemen. And so when you're forcing a couple departments together like that, they may not be mad at you, whoever the new chief's going to be, but they're mad at the system because they forced them to do this in most cases.
Okay. Well, I want to look at, go ahead, Chief Cowger.
I was just going to say, if we think about that change management side of things, and this is reading something into that question, so whoever asked that, please don't take it this way. But if we waited until it's a forced merger, we waited too long, because nothing's pleasant about force. I think we could all say that. So that's kind of that change management, is to be able to look into the future and hopefully work towards how do we guide these organizations into something that's palatable, because when it's forced, it's just ugly.
Okay. So I'm looking through the chats and I just want to see, and I'm not going to read the comments that are in here, but there was one kind of question. It would be very helpful if you could share detailed budget information, including revenue amounts and sources. Could this information be shared by email? Thanks in advance, John Younkin, Chief, Dushore Fire Department. If any of the chiefs on here want to share that information, if you want to get it to me, I'll see that it gets to him. Or if you want to send it to him directly, that's entirely up to you. A lot of the stuff in here it's comments. I don't see any questions.
Mhm.
A lot of positive comments. I see some of the panelists put their contact information in. Great. Okay. So we've come to the end of the questions and answers in the program. And look, Chiefs, I believe we covered a great deal of territory today. And we didn't even scratch the surface of all the things that would take to have a solid working combination fire department. I truly appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with our listeners today. I want to also thank our listeners for being with us for nearly 2 hours, and I hope you gained some great information. We'll be uploading this presentation to our Provident YouTube page if you'd like to watch it again or share it. As a reminder, there'll be a very short 5-question survey at the end of the program. Please take time to complete it. If you have any questions for our panelists that didn't get answered, or you need additional resources from today, or have an idea for a future webinar, please email us at info@providentins.com. We'll get an answer back to you as soon as we can. This wraps up another Provident webinar. Join us on December the 7th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when I'll be hosting an all-female panel of researchers and firefighters to discuss the studies related to women in the fire service and cancer. We'll begin the new year with a podcast followed by a webinar with Rich Marinucci, the Executive Director of the Fire Department Safety Officers Association. Stay tuned for dates and times. Until then, stay healthy and stay safe.